the Executive Vice President of Investor Relations and Corporate Affairs at Sibanye-StillWater. Mr. Wellsted, thanks for making the time to speak to us. Miners are calling on government to revoke Sibanye-StillWater's mining rights should it fail to honor a 3-year wage agreement. What is your take?
Good morning, Desiree, and good morning to your viewers. Yes, we have noted, obviously, the statements made by the Minister and obviously the unions now calling for the Minister to revoke our mining rights. We obviously will engage with the DMRE if they approach us on this basis. But I do want to point out that the reason we are not operating is because of the strike which was called by Amcu and NUM on the 9th of March. And they've dragged the strike out and extended this industrial action to this point. So the decision to stop operating was not ours. And in fact, we've been trying to come to an agreement to end the strike, which we realize is really inflicting a lot of financial hardship on our employees and on communities around our operations, and trying to bring an end to the strike. So we have actually reached out to the unions in the last couple of days and asked them whether they would be willing to meet under the auspices of the CCMA again for conciliation, and they have agreed, and we believe we will have our first meeting next week in this regard. But again, in terms of Section 47 of the MPRDA, we are not sure that that's lawful, to be honest, and obviously we reserve our rights to protect the interests of our shareholders and other stakeholders.
All right, just to let you know that we're following two stories at the same time. The President meeting the Chancellor of Germany, and we might just not cut it off, but just pause a bit in our interview to go there. But the demand by the miners is not solely from their side. The minister himself has at some point mentioned the possibility of a conversation about revoking the license. How are you engaging with this?
No, understood. And as I said, we note those remarks by the minister. The minister said that we are not mining, and hence he feels that if we're not producing, we are in breach of the MPRDA. But as I pointed out, our decision to not mine is not a decision we came to. It's because of a strike that was called by Amcu and NUM, who have been very rigid in their demands for 1,100 Rand per month increase each year for 3 years. Our offer of 850 Rand per month increase each year, we believe is fair, but it considers the sustainability of our operations and also the impact on our other stakeholders. The demands that the NUM and Amcu leadership have made are well above inflation, almost 10% in the first year, which is exactly the demands that the government is pushing back against in the current civil servant negotiations, and would affect the sustainability and life of our operations, which would result in early job losses for many of the 31,000 people we employ at these operations, and have significant consequences for other stakeholders, including communities, local small and medium enterprise that depend on our operations, as well as the national and regional economies. The point is that we need to preserve jobs in this country, not create more unemployment. And that's the reason why we are holding out against these unreasonable demands from the unions, because we cannot continue to absorb above inflation cost increases without consequences.
Just in terms of reading the room, the other conversation related to this development has been the exorbitant pay of your CEO, Mr. Neil Froneman. How are you balancing the two conversations?
So first off, obviously executive pay, that's defined by the board and the remuneration committee, and it's voted on by shareholders each year who approve the pay structures.
But it can't disregard the environment, sir. That conversation can't disregard the environment.
I'm trying to explain. The remuneration was put in place 3 years ago. So 267 million of that is due to share awards that were made in 2017 and 2018, when our share price was 11 Rand 44. When they vested this last year, our share price was 72 Rand. So we've grown the company from a 30 billion Rand South African gold producer to a 150 billion Rand international mining company, diversified mining company. And because of the shares were awarded as part of that remuneration package that was approved by shareholders and the Remco, that has resulted in a significant vesting for the executive management.
So,
we
Mr.
understand
Wellsted,
the issues between...
I want to ask you this.
Yeah.
If the remuneration is linked to share revenue, this implies that Sibanye-StillWater is doing well. And if it is, it should be able to pay its employees.
So we are doing well. If you looked at our financial performance, you would have seen last year we generated over 66 billion rand of EBITDA. So it's not a question of not affordability. We are negotiating at our gold operations, which only contribute 6% to that EBITDA. Our profits are mainly generated at our PGM operations. So we need to look at the gold operations in isolation and see how sustainable they are on their own. We operate in a cyclical industry. Only 4 years ago, the PGM basket price was 13,000 Rand per ounce, and our PGM operations that we acquired from Lonmin and Anglo American Platinum were loss-making. The basket prices have increased now to 40,000 Rand a kilogram, but we are potentially going into a global recession because of COVID and because of the Ukraine conflict. And those prices could drop back to those levels. So we cannot cross-subsidize loss-making gold operations from our PGM operations where we are investing in the future at the expense of those PGM operations.
So you operate in a cyclical environment, and your current indications are that your performance is doing well, you're getting good revenue, you're able to remunerate the executive at the exclusion of the workers?
So the executives, again, I need to repeat, got shares. So that's not it's not money that was made by the company. That is shareholders who agree to align executive remuneration with their
I have to disagree with you, sir.
Or how they benefit.
I have to disagree with you.
Well,
share revenue is linked to how much the company is making, and no matter how much you try to explain it, it does not make sense.
Madam, we've got very clearly laid out in our integrated report how the pay works and the remuneration works. There's a guaranteed portion, there are bonuses, but then there is a long-term incentive that vests over 3 years, which is a share price and return on invested capital linked performance. And that was voted on by shareholders in 2017 and 2018. The shares were then awarded to the executives who benefited from the improvement in the share price and the growth in the company.
And so what did the workers benefit?
It is different to what you're saying. The workers, we have offered the unions a profit share, which means that they would benefit over and above the pay increases by sharing in the profits of the company. We also have ESOPs in place, which do pay dividends to employees. But the difference in this is that, as I said, with the share price, our share price might go down next year. So that performance that Mr. Froneman benefited will not be repeated. The demands that the unions are making are forever. So once we agree to effectively the billion rand difference between what we're offering and the unions are demanding, that's in our cost base for the next 10 years. And that will add 10 billion rand to or remove 10 billion rand from our value. And it will impact on the sustainability of the operations, which will mean that we will end up potentially losing jobs earlier, which will impact on the entire economy.
Mr. Wellsted, the very strike we're talking about is the one during Workers' Month that thoroughly embarrassed President Cyril Ramaphosa. What will it take for Sibanye-StillWater to come to the table and hear the side of the workers?
We have heard the side of the workers. In fact, the workers have voted against, in many instances, the strike. The strike has been driven by union leadership who have been very rigid in their demands. They haven't moved from the 1,100 that they demanded in the beginning of the process, which was 11 months ago. We have made 7 moves and increased our offer significantly to a point where anything above this level will potentially result in early closure of the operations and job losses, which is what we are trying to avoid. Last week, we had a meeting with the unions, which was facilitated by the Minister and the DMRE, where we offered them other alternatives, being 5-year agreements with a 5% profit share on top of the increases that we're offering. And again, the unions rejected it. So I think it's a question of the unions coming to the party and not the company in this situation.
This cost analysis you're talking about, is it retrospective or is it a forecast? Aren't they basing their demands based on an agreement that was reached prior?
No. This is a 3-year wage, or normally it's a wage agreement. It is backdated to June last year because that's when we started the negotiations, but it's extended now for 11 months and we haven't reached agreement. We are still at deadlock with the unions. And depending on whether we agree on a 3 or the 5-year that we've offered them, that will then be, essentially date back to the 31st or 30th of June 2021. So it's a forward-looking wage agreement.
So are we looking at Sibanye-StillWater closing down eventually? Because it seems the employer is not budging and the employees are now camping at the union buildings wanting a response from the president to a corporate situation. He can't respond to a situation that's not a public
Correct.
Situation. Where's the middle ground
Correct.
here?
And that's why we've now requested the CCMA to come and intervene and conciliate in the process, because we are not making any headway with the unions, and our employees are the ones who are bearing the brunt of this. We've run a survey or a poll with our employees, and 85% of them want to come back to work. This is not a popular and it's not a well-supported strike. It has been driven by the leadership of Amcu and the NUM, and we are pleading with them to come back and negotiate in good faith. We are already offering above inflation increases. Year 1, 7.8% increase, year 2, 7.4% increase, and year 3, 6.8%, which is above inflation. And we are now have also offered a profit share over and above that. So I think you need to consider discussing this with the unions in this situation.
What percentage of the profit share are you offering?
It's 5%.
And that can be
profit.
verifiable?
Well, I mean, once it's agreed, but at the moment the unions have rejected it. So it's not, we haven't agreed to that, but that is what we've proposed, but it was rejected last week.
James Wellsted, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
James Wellsted is the Executive Vice President of Investor Relations and Corporate Affairs at Sibanye-StillWater. The situation